Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
Broncos country, I need to brace you for something. This roster might genuinely look different by the halfway point of this season and almost certainly by 2027. There's real method behind this idea, so let's walk through exactly why, starting with two specific offensive players who could actually benefit this organization more through a trade than by staying put. This entire conversation really starts with the cap situation, specifically looking ahead to 2027. Right now, Denver is projected to have a genuinely tight amount of cap space that year, somewhere around $11.5 million. That number is always fluid, obviously. Teams move players, restructure deals, and manipulate the cap constantly. But it also means some players simply might not get exactly what they're hoping for financially. That's just the reality of how this league operates as a business. Look at the actual 2027 cap numbers, and Courtland Sutton currently sits as the single highest hit on the roster that year, with a handful of other core players all carrying massive numbers right behind him. That's 4 players all over $27 million in cap hits in a single season, and that's before even factoring in a likely extension for Bo Nix, which is almost certainly coming at some point and will add even more long-term financial weight. So Denver clearly has real decisions to make here, figuring out how to create genuine breathing room to manage that cap situation and stay out of the red, especially with a real wave of core players entering free agency around that same window looking for their next big payday. That reality opens the door to trades becoming a genuine, realistic possibility. This organization is a business just like every other team in the league, and sometimes that means moving on from good players simply because the roster math and the cap sheet demand it. Let's start with the first trade candidate, Troy Franklin. This one's less about his actual cap number since he's still on a cost-controlled rookie contract and more about his shrinking role within this offense. With the addition of Jalen Waddle this offseason, there's a genuine logjam forming in this receiver room. Sure, you could argue this coaching staff will find ways to spread the ball around to everybody, but realistically, that's simply not how offenses work. With 6 wide receivers realistically active on a given week, a couple of them locked into pure blocking and special teams roles. That still leaves 5 receivers all competing for a limited number of targets on top of pass-catching running backs and tight ends also needing volume. There are simply too many mouths to feed, and there's real reason to doubt Franklin carves out the same kind of expanded role he had last season. To be fair, last season was a real, genuine improvement over his rookie year. But the underlying concern is that he doesn't have the most reliable hands, and there's real doubt he ever becomes a true 1,000-yard-plus receiver in this offense. We actually already saw his role shrink as last season progressed, well before Waddle was even a thought, once another young receiver started emerging and eating into his snap share. Digging into the actual route participation numbers from late last season, you can see that shift happening in real time, with his role clearly diminishing even before the newest star addition ever arrived. So if that trend was already unfolding last year, what happens to his role this season with an established 1-2 punch at receiver now, plus another rotational option with a very specific, valued skill set, plus 2 dedicated blocking specialists this coaching staff clearly prioritizes? There's a real, fair question about exactly where Franklin fits into that increasingly crowded picture. And it's not just a personal theory here. A respected Broncos-focused outlet made essentially the same exact point, pointing directly to a similar trade scenario from last year as a real precedent worth remembering. Last year, a certain veteran receiver clearly didn't have an obvious path to a meaningful role once a talented rookie emerged, and he ended up getting traded away right at the end of the preseason in exchange for real draft capital. The parallel here is clear. If Franklin's role is genuinely being questioned, there's a real chance this front office views him as a genuine trade chip rather than a long-term piece. Here's exactly why that timing matters. Trades are fundamentally about peak value, not just clearing out a crowded room. If you've got a player who's still on an affordable rookie contract and coming off arguably the best season of his career, that's exactly the moment his trade value is at its absolute highest. That's when you can realistically ask for a legitimate second or third round pick, and a desperate team elsewhere in the league bites. The counter-argument matters too. Why would you wait and see if his role continues shrinking and his value drops further when you could instead capitalize on that value being at an all-time high right now? This actually feels like exactly the kind of move that could realistically get done before the season even begins. So the real question isn't necessarily whether Franklin specifically gets traded. It's simply whether Denver trades a wide receiver at all this offseason. Plenty of fans have floated a different name as the more likely trade candidate, but there's real reason to believe Franklin, not that other name, ends up being the more logical trade chip given the exact roster and value dynamics at play. Now let's move to the second surprise trade candidate, offensive lineman Ben Powers. This one feels less like a training camp era move and considerably more like a realistic trade deadline scenario. Looking at this year's actual cap numbers, Powers currently sits as the second highest cap hit among the entire offensive line. And frankly, he's probably the weakest overall link among this specific line's starters. That's not a knock on him as a player. He's been genuinely solid and serviceable during his time in Denver. But at a cap number that actually exceeds what the team's star cornerback is carrying, that tells you something about the value equation here. If Denver trades him by the deadline, that move would free up real cap savings that could roll directly into the tighter 2027 cap situation. A meaningful boost to that overall number in one single transaction. And here's the elephant in the room worth mentioning. This front office specifically drafted a versatile offensive lineman this year, capable of sliding directly into that exact left guard spot. Trading Powers around the deadline would give that rookie a real runway of training camp, preseason, and roughly 8 regular season weeks to develop before stepping into a starting role right as the trade deadline approaches. That's a young player on a cost-controlled rookie deal sliding into a starting job, real cap savings freed up, and a draft pick added to the return, all in one move. And it's worth remembering, offensive line remains one of the most heavily traded position groups at every deadline. Teams are constantly looking for that kind of help. That rookie lineman's college tape backs up real confidence in this plan too, with genuinely elite metrics around limiting both penalties and pressures allowed. Ranking at the very top of his conference in pressure rate allowed last season. And he's already stated publicly that he's comfortable playing multiple spots along the line, adding real flexibility to how this coaching staff could deploy him, and if there's hesitation about throwing a rookie directly into a starting role. There's also a proven veteran option already on this roster who signed a multi-year deal specifically to be part of this plan, stepping in capably last season once Powers went down with a bicep injury. Digging into the actual per-game numbers between the two, the returning veteran's pressure rate allowed over his starts last season was remarkably close to what Powers allowed in his own limited action, essentially delivering nearly identical per-game output. His overall ranking among qualified starting left guards league-wide landed in a respectable, if unspectacular, tier, not elite, but genuinely serviceable enough to make this transition considerably less risky than it might initially sound. To be fair, there's been public reporting suggesting this organization has no plans to trade Powers, with some fans reading between the lines to interpret that stance as essentially meaning any team wanting him will simply have to trade for him outright. And here's the practical reality worth remembering. He's set to become a free agent next offseason regardless. Given the roster investments already made this offseason, there's real reason to doubt this organization re-signs him long-term anyway. So if he's likely walking in free agency next year regardless, Why not maximize his value now through a trade rather than risk losing him for nothing later? Put both of these moves together and the logic is genuinely compelling. Moving on from both Powers and Franklin wouldn't meaningfully hurt this offense at all, given the depth and replacement options already in place behind both of them. A realistic outcome could land somewhere around a fourth-round pick for Powers and a second- or third-round pick for Franklin. Even in a best-case scenario netting a second and a fourth combined, without this offense losing an ounce of real production, that's an outcome absolutely worth taking. So there you have it, Broncos country. Two names worth watching closely as realistic trade candidates this year. One potentially moving before the season even starts, and one more likely to happen right around the trade deadline. Both driven by smart, forward-thinking roster and cap management rather than any lack of confidence in either player. So let us know down in the comments. Do you think Troy Franklin gets traded before the season begins? And would you be comfortable seeing Ben Powers moved at the deadline in favor of a rookie or the returning veteran option? We want to hear it all. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, make sure you smash that like button, hit that subscribe button and bell icon, and drop your thoughts down in the comments. Mile high salute, Broncos country. Be cool, and we'll see you next time.